The next episodes of Thriving Construction come straight from Future Build. Huge thanks to Eco Cocoon. The space was great for chats, acoustics, and even better well-being.
When I worked in industry, I used to love showing my family the buildings I'd worked on, because there's like this like real proud moment, right? Of like, here's a building that I designed and now you can see it.
Yeah.
And now I'm starting to get to that point where I'm seeing my students who've graduated and gone on to do incredible things. And I feel like I have the same sort of proud moments. Like, here's people that I've had a little bit of influence over who have gone on to do remarkable things, you know, and some of them have done really incredible things.
I love that. I'm interested as well in the books. Yeah, you've written. How many have you published? And what is it you're working on at the moment?
I've written 6. So I was really hoping one would come out today, but it's not going to come out until Monday. So the latest one is called The Future of Structural Design, and it comes out on Monday, hopefully. And it's about where structural engineering could go next. So I'm seeing it as a piece of possibilism. So it's like helping engineers to create the imagination infrastructure to imagine what it is they could be doing in the future. So I think the reality is we're going to see more automation of sort of standardized design. Like, anything that you can do with a spreadsheet now will be automated more and more going forward in the future. Anything that's codified now, I assume, will become standardized in the future. And therefore, the role of the engineer hopefully will shift from someone who just sits down and, you know, produces loads of calcs to someone who is thinking about buildability. They are playing with materials. They're doing physical testing materials. So this lovely little pavilion that we're sat in, you know, someone would need to understand the racking behavior of these panels. You can't do that with a computer or with some sort of automated process. You actually need to physically test it. As we move much more into reuse of existing buildings, we need to understand how our existing buildings are performing, how we can intervene to improve their performance, all of that sort of stuff. So I see that the future engineer will have a much more, I don't know, like, when I thought about being an engineer as a child, I think I thought it was going to be much more like, you know, mad professor in a garage playing with stuff, building stuff, you know, kind of pushing it, pulling it. And also I thought it was going to be much more mathematically intense. And I think most stuff now is not that mathematically hard if you're kind of reasonably fluent in maths. And it's also not particularly practical. You're just kind of following process. So I feel it could be really exciting.
I love that. The other thing that I've just, as you were speaking there, I'm just wondering about is the impact that the books have on people. So you've made reference to you loving the job and the role that you're in at the moment and seeing these graduates go on to do significant, great things because of the influence and the impact that you've had.
Yeah.
So I think it's the same with the books that you're writing. And I'm just wondering, have you had that feedback loop come back with reference to the books that you write to say, actually, James, the book that you have written here, or these collection of books, have really helped me to clarify something so that I've been able to do this, and I'm really proud of this?
Yeah, one of the nicest moments is when someone messages me on LinkedIn and says, I've just finished reading your book, or I read your book 10 years ago and I'm still applying. That's a massive win, you know, to know that someone has kind of taken my work and run with it and tried to have a go with it and seen what they can do with it. That feels really, really positive. Yeah, really exciting. So I have, but I don't think we as people are particularly good at providing that feedback necessarily. And the last thing that anyone wants to do is send out continuous like questionnaires, because I don't know about you, but I'm sure after this event, I'll get a questionnaire about how was the event. And we're continuously bombarded with people wanting kind of like this meaningless feedback, you know, out of 1 to 5. Whereas I think what we don't give much of, and we all, including myself, although I did this just the other day with a company, I wrote them an email, I was asking a question about something. They came back to me and then I went back to them and I answered their questions, but I was like, look, your questions are quite narrow. My answer to your questions is such that your product looks worse than the product that you've asked me to compare it to. But the reality is your product I use on a daily basis and theirs I don't. And it's because you haven't asked me to kind of comment on my entire experience. I think there's like a richness in feedback that is missing when we could all, you know, support each other with positive feedback in that way. So I love it when I get feedback on my books. And I really love it, actually, when people tell me like what is missing. I'm always keen to think about how could this be better. Like, so Conceptual Design of Buildings, which is a book I produced 4 years ago for the Institution of Structural Engineers. It basically takes you through the whole conceptual design process for steel buildings, concrete buildings, timber buildings. It's now 5 years old. I feel like it needs a version 2. I already know the version 2 should cover more materials. It should think about embodied carbon from the off. Like, how do we talk about embodied carbon at the very beginning of the design process? Like, we kind of talked about it a little bit, but we didn't provide anything like enough because the conversations moved forward in those 5 years. I would love to know where it's working, where it's not working, where, like, am I reinforcing the status quo? Like, structural engineers in early design generally over-design because they're worried that things are going to change and they don't want to, like, massively, like, go, oh, well, now you've changed it, I've got to redesign everything. So they tend to add a bit of extra capacity. But have we gone too far in that direction? Should we be challenging engineers more to design to the bone from the off and make it clear, look, if you're going to change things, things will get bigger. Like, rather than saying, oh, yeah, it's fine, we can manage that. Basically, when they say it's fine, we can manage that, they've overestimated at the beginning. So, like, I'm wondering, are there cultural shifts that we are not yet capturing, which we should be capturing through that? But and if people tell me, if people give me feedback, then that's really, really helpful. But like I was saying to my students about my unit, I was asking them for some feedback. I said, if you only tell me about the negative things, I will change it just in response to the negative. So it's nice to hear the positive things as well, because if one person says they don't like this and 3 people say they do like it as it is, then I know it's good as it is, rather than assuming that it's rubbish because the only feedback I get is negative.
So just within that, and you're talking about the culture, do you mean the culture within the UK or do you mean Western culture? And specifically to do with the over-engineering of our structures?
Yeah, I would find it hard to comment beyond the UK in terms of my own personal experience. So the projects that I've worked on, I worked in industry for about 15 years. All but one of my projects was UK based. I've worked only with UK design practices. I did work for Ramboll, who are Danish, but I worked for Whitby Bird, who was bought by Ramboll. So the culture was very much the Whitby Bird culture. So my experience is very much the UK culture. And I left industry 15 years ago now. I've tried to stay really well connected. I have loads of friends. In fact, possibly I'm better connected with structural engineers since I left, because my networking has gone from, I don't want to talk to structural engineers because they're the competitor, to I really want to talk to structural engineers because I want to work with them and, I want to tell them about how good my graduates are and I want to hear about job opportunities and I want to find out what's going on in the industry and make sure I'm up to date. So my perspective is probably quite UK focused. That being said, I wouldn't be surprised if it was true elsewhere, but I couldn't comment on that.
For sure. Right. Okay. So you're here today at Future Build, and are you part of a panel, or are you speaking?
So I'm running a panel on natural building materials, structural materials. So I'm talking about something called regenerative design, which is how to think about design that goes beyond do no harm. And it's not just about the climate emergency. So it's not just about using materials that sequester carbon and reduce the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. It's thinking about how do we do that in a way that reduces carbon in the atmosphere, but increases biodiversity and increases human flourishing. So I really like straw bales. So we're sat in a space full of straw bales. So straw bale is an example of how you might do that. So how would you create a supply chain? And as a structural engineer, I think we're really poor at understanding our supply chains and we need to get better. But how do we create supply chain, which is sequestering carbon, which straw does, increasing biodiversity? So that would depend on the farming techniques that are being used for that particular straw, but we could ask that question and try and find out and then start to specify materials that fit within particular agricultural practices and create flourishing communities. So we could then start to think about what goes on at the point of where the thing is being grown, how's it harvested, what's the impact on the community, what type of labor do they utilize, how do we enable that supply chain to increase its value? Like straw is a waste material, it has very little value. If it becomes a construction product, its value goes up quite a lot. If we increase the value of the product, it means that they can, pay people more money to do the work. So how can we create these positive supply chains which are good for us, because they create great buildings which function well, that have good insulating properties, but are also good for the planet and for the communities along the supply chain. So that's the kind of the regenerative design bit. And I think most of my thoughts, it's not that you can't do it with other materials, but I think it's easiest to see how you can do it with renewable materials, so timber, straw, bamboo, using materials like hemp shiv. So yeah, those kind of materials, it's just much easier to conceptualize what that could look like. That's what I'll be talking about for 10 minutes. And then we're going to have someone talking about certification. Sounds really boring, but I think quality assurance is actually massively important. It's massively important because we need things to be safe. We need them to be done properly. And I think when you go off-piste, when you design something that is different to the norm, people are kind of expecting it to fail and want it, maybe they don't want it to fail. But, I feel like there's lots of doubters who don't expect these things to succeed. So quality assuring your work meticulously and making sure it is successful is really key. And then the third speaker is talking about bamboo, specifically in designing with bamboo, which is an area I've got a small interest in. In fact, me and the third speaker supervised a PhD student together looking at bamboo connections. So we're talking about kind of different aspects of natural building materials.
Yeah. And so if this is your passion, it sounds like, the way that you're speaking about it.
Yeah. I think my real passion is just changing industry. The more I thought about it, I think that's where it sits. I could talk to you passionately about concrete. I actually love concrete. Like most of the buildings I designed were designed out of concrete. My challenge with concrete is I am at the moment, and maybe there are people here who can help me, I'm at the moment struggling to see how concrete goes beyond do no harm within the current context. So I think we could change the context. We could do some things to think much more about the supply chain of things like sand and aggregate. We could think about the water we're using. We could think about the way we process and create cement. You did a chat, I think it was probably a while ago, but I found it on your tube with someone who was looking at magnesium-based cement to make low carbon or zero carbon concrete. I think, we could be having those conversations. I just think the infrastructure in terms of the real infrastructure and also the sort of the mental infrastructure to imagine what that might look like, I think it's harder to get there. I feel with growing materials you can. So I think I'm passionate about change generally. It's just at the moment, natural building materials, it feels like it's lower hanging fruit, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? But just going back to that podcast, it was with a guy called Barney Shanks.
Yeah, I loved it.
Yeah, and the interesting thing, I don't know if he picked up on this, was that he said that the technology is already there to do that, and he's taken it to the big cement boys.
Yeah.
And girls.
Yeah.
But they're not interested.
Yeah.
Because their current system works really well for them.
Yeah, of course it does.
And they don't want to break the status quo.
Yeah, of course.
They didn't say it in those words.
Yeah.
That's effectively, the reason why his thing is not being used at scale.
Yeah, of course. And I think that's part of the thing about regenerative design is think about systems change and how we create systems change. And as engineers, our role and architects and other people in the built environment, we need to understand the impact we can have and the agency we carry. So I think the most exciting thing at the moment about a design project is the specifications. And it's exciting because no one ever cares about the specifications. Like, they are the thing that get done last, they get done in a rush, but they are absolutely full of opportunity to change the way we do business. So at the moment, the way that we produce cement works for the cement companies, but our specifications aren't challenging our cement companies to think differently. And actually, we're not even at the point where we know what questions we should be asking about cement companies. So yeah. I feel like there is the opportunity, but we gotta be agents of change.
And I think that's the thing, is that unless you ask a high-level question,
yeah.
you're never going to get a high-level answer.
Correct.
And unless you're aware enough to be asking or thinking about what different questions can I ask, then that question is not even going to get tabled. Yeah, and that's kind of the way that it feels at the moment, is that there's so many people that are around that know that they want something different.
Yes.
So they don't know what question to ask.
Yes.
And the organizations that can make the change aren't interested in the questions because they are just wanting to keep the status quo because that's where that value or money transaction goes on with them.
Yeah. Yeah, although that's true for them right now, right? But if the world changes, their models may not work so well.
So what is it that, because I'm with you, there will be change, or there could be change, or the hope is that there will be change.
Yeah.
But when you talk about the world changing or things changing, is like, what is it that's going to change? And what is it that we can do
Yes.
to try and expedite that change?
It's great question. So I think the best example that I personally know of the change is around embodied carbon. So I joined industry in 2000. At that point, embodied carbon was a non-issue. People weren't talking about it. In fact, I remember when I worked in industry, probably between all the way from 2000 to 2015, I was told embodied carbon is a non-issue and mechanical and electrical engineers are basically sustainable engineers. Like, you as a structural engineer, you have nothing to do with sustainability. Just make sure our building doesn't fall over. That's all we care about. And partly that was because other operational carbon at the time was significantly higher, so it was correct. But partly, I think there was also, we weren't advocating for ourselves in terms of what we could do. And also, we thought it was too hard to calculate the embodied carbon. Like, that was the message that was out. But then what happened is a few people started actually doing the work. So 2008, the inventory for carbon and ICE, the inventory of carbon and energy, or whatever I think it's called, came out, which actually started to say, this is the embodied carbon and this is the embodied energy in the manufacture, cradle to gate, of this material. So suddenly we got this information and we can go, oh, okay, well, that's useful, but I still can't apply it on a project because it feels like a lot of work. But then people start going, oh, wait a minute. Okay, I've got this data, and actually it's not that much work. So one of my ex-colleagues, Katie Simons, for example, she was working for Ramble at the time in the Cambridge office, and she decided off her own back to calculate the embodied carbon of different options. This is probably 2011, 2010, and presented them back to the client and said, this is the embodied carbon for these options that we're proposing. Now, no one else I know was doing that. Now, we organised a research event to celebrate like the best practice in our organisation. And Katie came and spoke at that. And I was like, this is amazing, right? This is really, really exciting. And then other people started doing the same thing, right? So she's not the only person. Lots of people are doing this, but I'm aware of her work. And then someone like Simon Smith, who just happened to be her boss, he sets up his own practice and he starts calculating the carbon, not on a few projects, but on every single project. And he now produces a report every year that maps how much carbon they have specified from the day their practice started until now. And so that's like really taking ownership of their work, the impact that's coming. They're thinking about how to reduce it, but they're also understanding the impact. And then we get people starting to produce tools that calculate this stuff. So like Elliot Wood produced an online tool which they share for free through the structural engineering website. And you go, oh, actually, I can start to do, and then we get BIM, which is a technology, nothing to do with carbon, but produces all of the quantities of all of the materials in our building. So we go, oh, something that was really hard is actually a lot easier now. And actually, you can just create a spreadsheet and it tells you how much carbon. And suddenly we've got this world where we're now starting to say we should be actually not just calculating carbon, but we should have like ways of comparing across different organizations how we calculate it. And then we should be benchmarking it. Then we should be challenging people. You need to reduce your carbon, embodied carbon on a structure from this to this or whatever it might be. Now, that hasn't happened overnight, right? That started with a few people working on small projects, challenging the status quo and going the extra mile. And then they didn't just do the work, they shared the work. So other people started to hear about it. And over time, that has snowballed. So I think we can feel a bit helpless. Like I worked on projects and felt really frustrated by the lack of change. But actually, if we keep sharing the stories, if we keep trying to do the good things, if we share when they work, if we share where they don't work and explain what are the barriers and see if other people have had the same problems, and then we can start to say, this is a systemic barrier that is stopping us moving forward in this space. We all want to get to here, but we all need to solve this problem. Let's start talking about who solved it. Do you know what I mean? And we start to work not as individuals, but as a community of practitioners to try and bring around the change we actually want to bring around.
Yeah. I think that is what you're saying is really powerful there, because it's about the intentional consistency.
Yes.
So it's about just knowing that it's not going to be done in 2 weeks or 2 months or even 2 years.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's really important just to be consistent.
Yeah. And, I graduated in 2000 and we were already talking about the climate emergency in 2000, right? It's not a new conversation, it's an old conversation. But the world has moved. Our organizations, the way we do business has changed. I was thinking on the way down, about BREAM. I don't know about you. Do you know? I don't know how much you know about BREAM, but
we actually do BREAM assessments.
You do BREAM?
Yeah. The consultancy, Darren Evans. We do the energy and sustainability.
Amazing.
So yeah,
I have gone on a genuine roller coaster with BREAM.
Okay.
So I've gone from not knowing what it was to finding out what it was and thinking this is absolutely brilliant. BREAM is so good. To then realizing, oh wait, as a structural engineer, I don't really have much impact on BREAM. And starting to feel quite disenchanted or frustrated with BREAM and thinking, this is really rubbish. How can they completely cut out my entire industry in their assessment? So feeling quite bad about BREAM and thinking we probably should be thinking about using LCA or other methods to understand what's going on, not BREAM. And now I've kind of gone through circle. I think the thing about BREAM, right, is if you focus on the number of points you get, you can play the game. You can change the system to get the outcome you want without necessarily doing what is the best thing. But here's the bit that I kind of hadn't realized and I'm now realizing is I now know what the best thing looks like, which I didn't before BREAM came in. Do you know what I mean? So I can play the game and cheat the system and produce a design which still gets BREAM excellent, but actually I know that there was another better solution out there, which I chose not to pursue. But I also now know that is true. When I started in industry, I had no idea that we needed to think about all of this stuff when we were designing buildings. I thought all we had to do was make it stand up and maybe think a little bit about the operation of carbon, and that was it. So there's a richness to BREAM, and it challenges us to think in ways which we didn't think before BREAM came out. And actually, I think, whilst I think BREAM should continuously evolve and should update and should reflect kind of not just the current thinking, but the next step in future thinking, and, should really continue to challenge engineers, it has brought about a huge cultural shift in our industry, which I think we are quick to not fully acknowledge. Does that make sense?
Definitely. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's interesting as well that you've gone on this cycle, on this journey of didn't know, now I know it's awesome, know it's terrible, actually it's really good. Yeah, because you've seen the impact on a wider, which kind of goes back to, I think you've kind of reinforcing my point, which is it's really important just to be consistent.
Yes.
Because that's how we actually get to and affect the change.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think when we first wrote the book, I think it is still there, but we kind of went big on it. So the Regenerative Structural Engineer, when we first wrote it, we wrote an entire chapter on sustaining yourself, because actually it's really easy to give up in this space, to feel disheartened, to feel like I've tried and it didn't work, and now I'm going to go back to just doing it the way I've always done it, because when I try and do things differently, I just get pushed back. But we need to, as a community, encourage each other, support each other, work together to continuously move forward. And I think that means, being kind to each other, looking out for each other, supporting each other, realizing that we need to have long-term sustainability in terms of our own kind of aspirations, careers, ourselves. Maybe if we're finding it traumatic, you need to maybe seek out some counseling, talk it through with someone, actually get professional help so that we can carry on doing the good work, So we're investing ourselves so that we can keep doing the things that we need to do. And I think that's really important. And I think, in my industry, things like talking about mental health and, getting support for your mental health and stuff like that is not necessarily, kind of that prevalent, but I think it's really important. I think it can be really disheartening. It can be quite frustrating, can't it, when we look around us and we see all that's going on and we go, and it can be overwhelming at times. I feel overwhelmed at times by what I see about me. But yeah, I try and keep on keeping on. I try and remain positive, and that would be impossible on my own. It's about community. It's about having people around us, connecting with people, listening to things. I've loved listening to your podcast recently. I didn't know about it until you asked me to be on it, and then I was like, right, I'm gonna find out what this is all about. So I listened to a few episodes that were really encouraging, really exciting. So I think all of that is good for helping us keep going.
Well, I really appreciate you coming onto the podcast and for your wisdom, your passion, your energy. And I think also from my point of view, just helping to nurture what I define as the rising generation, those people that are coming into deciding what they want to do in the world and impact that they want to make on the world. And so it's great mentors and guides like yourself that really help to shape them. And so thank you for doing that.
My absolute pleasure. My absolute pleasure. I love it.
It's been great to have you here, and I hope you enjoy the rest of Future Build and those panels and those speeches and talks that you've got go really well for you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it.
Thanks for watching to the end. I think that you'll like this, but before you do that, just make sure that you've commented and liked below, and also that you subscribed.